Hello. I hope you all enjoyed Lisa's talk. My talk's going to be like completely different, and I really hope that my slides get the award for like the most bland slides in the entire conference. I have like 2 images, no emojis, basically nothing else. But I want to talk about teaching Rust and learning Rust, or just teaching and learning in general. Like only half of the talk is actually about Rust. But before that, because I wrote like 3 words as my speaker bio, I'm going to talk a bit about myself. My name is Liv. My name is Liv. I use they, them pronouns. And as Sarah and I just collectively said, I work at Axo. I don't know what my job title is, but I work at Axo. Outside of that, this is completely unrelated, but I'm a huge fan of static site generators. I've contributed to numerous of them. Sort of my pet project when I learn a new programming language is to write a static site generator. So if you have opinions about that, I would love to talk about it. Again, not the topic of my talk, but maybe more interestingly, I used to be on the Rust community team, and I organize workshops for fun mostly. Also like meetups and I guess conferences too. JSConf did some stuff there. But mainly workshops. So I technically run the Rust Bridge workshop program team thing, which, thank you, which there was one yesterday. I think it went pretty well. And these are my 2 images. So I have one. Oh my God, that's so slow. So this one is from actually RustCon Asia in Beijing in 2019. And this one is from literally yesterday. So it went pretty well. Oh, OK, I did this wrong. It's just going to go the entire thing down. Yes, OK. Oh my God. OK, I've never used Keynote before. But what's most relevant to this talk is that I'm the maintainer of Rustlings. Small show of hands, who here has used Rustlings before? Oh my God. OK, that's like half of you, maybe, more or less. I'm still going to talk about it a bit at an elementary level. So if I were to write, I guess, like a marketing slogan for Rustlings, I would call it a self-guided learning course for Rust syntax, blah, blah, blah. What that means, basically, Rustlings is a collection of a lot of small exercises, a lot of small like snippets of Rust code that are all broken in one way or another. And the user needs to fix it. So there can be compiler errors, like syntax errors. There can be logic errors. There can be like other semantic stuff. Rustlings is one of the like in the group of official project learning material, I guess, which puts it up there, I think, with like the book, so the Rust book, and I think Rust by example. And I think that's like there's the Nomicon, there's the Cargo book, there's a bunch of other books, but it's officially in the project. But I'm the only maintainer. It's been around since 2015. It was originally authored by Carol Nichols Golding. The original form of it was that you would run these little snippets in the Rust playground. If you don't know what the Rust playground is, go look it up. It's very useful. It's like an online Rust compiler. It's like GitHub Gist meets the Rust compiler. It's great. This worked well. But we rewrote it I think it was at RustFest in Paris. At the Impl days after that, we rewrote it in like a day to basically require the user to download it to their computer. And for there also to be a little CLI to kind of help guide them through it. I'm going to talk about like the sort of, I guess, advantages of that in a bit. But one of the cool things is that, as far as I know, Rustlings is also pretty widely used by like universities, colleges. I think JetBrains, who's also a sponsor here, at some point even adapted it for like their own internal learning materials, which is very cool. I think I've talked enough about it. I want to talk a bit more about how people learn with Rustlings. So basically, from a user's perspective, how would you go through it? And what are the specific points that we can kind of isolate from this? So as I said, Rustlings is contained in a GitHub repository that contains these 2 parts. One is the exercises. So it's a bunch of Rust files, just a bunch of, like literally a bunch of Rust files. There's no like cargo or anything. We just just imagine if like Rust was a scripting language. It basically looks like that. And then there's also a CLI that here that helps guide you through the recommended order of exercises, because there needs to be some sort of recommended order. And it also has a little like watch loop. So when you change an exercise, it recompiles it for you. And it automatically like figures out which exercise you're currently working on. There's a lot of convenience in it. The point of it is to get you working, get you writing Rust as quickly as possible on your own machine. And also to teach you specifically this compiler feedback loop, because this is something you're going to be using a lot of the time when you learn Rust, as I'm sure most of you know. The other thing that's special about Rustlings is it actually works really well together with the Rust book. In fact, we recommend using Rustlings alongside the book. The book is great. Everyone knows this, right? The book is great, but the book is a book. It has a lot of technical content. It has a really good amount of examples, but Rustlings is completely practical in the sense that it gets you installing and writing code at the very beginning. So they kind of play together really well. It's sort of a healthy mix, I think. And specifically with this compiler feedback loop, I think Rustlings really fills a gap there. Yeah, so okay, this is what I just said, yes. Just like, I think I really want to put emphasis on the whole compiler feedback thing, which is very Rust-ish, that in other languages you wouldn't even dream of basically orienting your coding along the compiler, along what the compiler tells you. So that's a point that's specific to Rust, and it needs to be taught at some point. Okay, I'm gonna take a sip of water. But I've talked about Rustlings for a while, and you might be thinking, why the hell did you come here? Did you come here to talk about your own project? I mean, okay, yes, but did you come here to like rave about your own project for 30 minutes? No. The whole impetus of my talk is I was doing maintainer things. I was looking at my GitHub notifications one day, and I saw 4 pull requests, 4 open pull requests on Rustlings. They were all by different users, and they were all different people, and they were all first-time contributors. So it was their first pull request, 4 separate times in like the time span of a day. And that got me to think, I've never seen this before. Any other project I've had didn't have this high of a first-time contributor sort of rate that Rustlings does. This is like way higher for some reason. So the original idea for my talk was that I was going to like crunch some numbers, which is coincidentally what this slide is called. I was going to get some data from the GitHub API for a couple of different projects to compare it. I was going to write a script, which I did in JavaScript. I'm sorry. I'm also not very good at like data visualization, so you're gonna have to take the raw terminal output. Again, sorry, I'm really going for the blandest slides thing for this conference. I heard there's an award. But yeah, so I did this, and I want to do a little control case. I'm just going to use the Rustlang/Rust repository first. So that's the Rust compiler. Now the problem with this, how many of you have used the GitHub API before for work? How slow do you think it is? It's too slow. Do you know how many pull requests Rust has? Like 65,000. You can imagine. So I only got the first 1,000 pull requests. This is only from this year too, so there's so many pull requests. But I did like my little script on it, and it turns out we have 228 unique authors. So 228 people that did the first pull request this year. It's like not a, yeah, but it doesn't work because it's only for this year and it's a limited amount of pull requests, but we can roughly see the sort of statistic that I'm going with here. So about 23% of sort of unique contributors here, which is not a lot. I can only guess why, and it's probably that the Rust project is like really complex. Or at least it seems that way to a lot of people. But it's also very actively worked on by a lot of contributors, which is why there's so many, I think, pull requests. However, it also includes the source of the book, which is technically teaching material, like that's in tree. So I don't know, like, I think it's still like too intimidating for a lot of people to contribute, which I understand, and that's fine, and I haven't done it, I certainly haven't. So this is just kind of my control case. Let's look at a bit of a less complex, but I think equally sort of well-known project, which is Surday. I was wondering if this was too small, but it seems like it's fine. So Surday, this is all pull requests on Surday that ever happened. We see that we have a total percentage of 31, but if we go by year, it looks pretty good. We have like over 50% unique people. So this is nice. Let's take another project. So let's say Tokyo, for example. Tokyo has a lot more pull requests, which means it's a lot more like, I think, actively worked on. But it only has a 23% percentage. And it doesn't hit like 50%. I'm not like judging these projects, by the way. Like Tokyo and Surday are great. So is Rust, of course. I just want to make the comparison here directly. So if you look at Rustlings, that's 58% overall. For most of these years, we're hitting like 50 or 60%. And you can see the amount of PRs sort of increases every year, more or less. Which makes me think I was right about my hunch that Rustlings, for some reason, gets a lot more PRs from first-time people than normal. And obviously, like, I want to express this as a good thing. This is the whole reason for my talk. What can we learn from this? What can you do to get this sort of same like level of new contributors to your project? So I'm gonna try and like guess, basically. I'm gonna try and guess what the reason for this is. And this is my next slide here. So why do we have so many first-time contributors? This might be implying that I like hate first-time contributors. It's just more work for me, but it's a good thing. It's just more work, unfortunately, and I'm one person. So if you've ever had a PR to Rustlings and I haven't replied in like 2 months, I'm sorry. I was sleeping, probably. So I think the first and most obvious one is its teaching material. It's fundamentally different from most other types of projects because the way people interact with it is they try to understand it. For a lot of projects, you use it, but you don't like necessarily read the source code. That's something that requires a whole other like level of interaction, whereas for teaching projects like Rustlings, the whole point of it is to read the source code, quote unquote, is to understand how the project works, how its exercises works, which makes you uniquely qualified at the end to contribute back to it. I really think like people sort of try and become experts in the code through this process. There's also just a lot of it. Like there's like 100 exercises, more or less. Some of them are pretty complex. I'm literally one person maintaining it. And I have a reasonable amount of enthusiasm for open source work. So there's a bunch of oversights that I end up making, which a lot of people kindly fix. What I'm saying is there's enough opportunities for people to fix things. A lot of like smaller fixes and stuff. And I think I literally duplicated a point, but like, yes, no, this is a different point. Rustlings is kind of, I don't know if anyone else has ever, maybe this is just me, but when you sort of first learn a language, you have a unique sort of relationship with the tools that you use to do it. I remember this, when I learned programming, was mainly via Scratch. I still remember Scratch. I think Scratch has a special place in my heart, and I think this goes for Rustlings as well, or it goes for really anything that you use to learn a language. This, by itself, I think, lowers the hurdle for contributing dramatically, just because you know, well, you have this sort of special, it's like psychology what I'm saying here. I'm sorry, you came to a Rust conference, and I'm talking about like psychology, but yeah, this is what I'm thinking. Another point, I guess a side note here that might be interesting is that because Rustlings is official Rust project learning materials, and because it teaches like from the very beginning, like how do you define a variable, all the way up to like how do you write thread safe code, like how do you use RC, how do you use box, that sort of thing. So it spans a pretty wide area of Rust syntax and like concepts. This means the language obviously also moves forward. So sometimes there's things that stop being idiomatic with new releases. Sometimes there's things that become idiomatic with new releases. And that needs to necessarily transfer to Rustlings. So sometimes, for example, I think a good example was when the new templating string syntax where you can put a variable name inside of the curly brackets came out. I got like 5 pull requests on Rustlings being like, hey, we can replace a bunch of occurrences with this. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's just sort of a side note. I think one thing that we do actually do that is very directly connected is that when you finish Rustlings, you get prompted to contribute. So it says like, hey, thank you for finishing. If you had any questions, if you have any suggestions, if you would like to contribute a new exercise, anything like that, please feel free to open an issue, make a pull request, that sort of thing. The reason this is at the end is, I think, because of what I mentioned above, which is it acts on that sort of like special relationship that people have with it at that point. Okay, cool. I've talked about teaching stuff for like a while. And you might be wondering yourself, I'm not a teacher. What the hell am I supposed to learn from this? I'm a developer, which is a fair question. And I noticed this at some point when writing this talk too. But then it hit me. We are all teachers in a way because docs are teaching materials. And I hope everyone here has written docs before. Because if you haven't, you probably should, because it's a good thing. I feel like you really have to take this to heart, because I only made this obvious to me when I was writing this talk. Docs are teaching materials. You are teaching people. And by internalizing that, I think you realize a lot more about how you can write better docs. For example, I realized when people interact with docs, when people interact with your project, a lot of them, I think, like just kind of lose interest really early. Not lose interest, maybe like they just kind of stop interacting with your project. We can say they bounce in a way. This can be for any number of reasons. It might be because it genuinely just is kind of the wrong fit for them, but it can also be because maybe the docs just kind of didn't work for them for one reason or another. The thing is, we don't know why. So consider just kind of giving people a chance really early on when they're discovering your thing to tell you this. Maybe there's something really obvious that you missed that you never in your life would have figured out. It's plainly obvious to this one person, but you would have never figured it out. It can happen. The thing that makes this a bit harder, I think, the earlier on people are in learning your tool, the less they'll feel qualified to give feedback, right? I think this makes sense, because I certainly have had this, where I was like, oh, am I really, like, I'm sure this was intentional, I'm sure they're meant for this, I'm sure I'm just not like the right person to comment on this. The funny thing is, I think it's exactly this feedback you need. The longer you take to fix it, assuming there's something wrong, the more people bounce the exact same way. So it's important to kind of, and this has a lot, I'm not gonna say that like, I'm not gonna suggest any like specific things that you can do to fix this. One, because I literally don't know. It's like a really complex thing. And two, because it's different in every project, right? Every project has docs in different forms. It has different ways of conveying information to people. But I think just realizing this automatically makes you think about like, oh yeah, we could be improving something. We could be doing something better. Like we could be roping people in another way. Whether that's they join your community earlier, or like you have a prompt, you literally say in your docs like, hey, did you understand everything about this introduction? Do you have any questions? Feel free to let us know here or there or whatever. Can take a lot of different ways. I think I would be blowing the scope of this talk by talking about those ways. But you should do that. The other thing is also just kind of docs aren't static. I think a lot of people, I'm guilty of forgetting this a couple of times. You can change docs, they're living documents, unless you literally print them out and hand them to people. But most people, I think, don't do that. So your users should have the opportunity to fix things, but they should also have the opportunity to tell you to fix things, because a lot of the time it is just that hurdle, that mental hurdle of like, I don't feel qualified to do this. Any way you get it out of people is good, except if you're like threatening them. And obviously docs contributions are contributions, right? The other way I think this could help is if you get people to try your product, even if it's not for them, you might not really have a way to engage with people that read your docs online, but you can reach out specifically to people to get them to try your thing, even if it's maybe not designed for them, even if they don't work in the same section of the industry or whatever. Because even if they don't end up using your tool, the feedback that you get can still be really valuable. You should really, obviously I'm not telling you to go out on the street and pick a stranger and say, hey, try my app. That would be weird, but people you know, people you feel would be receptive to this. Go ahead, don't be a creep, don't be a weirdo, but like be forward, but also be like open at the same time. I have no idea how much time I'm taking because my timer is completely wrong, but I'm just going to keep going. Right, so I think this is sort of the main point I'm making here. What's important to keep in mind is that obviously not all feedback is good feedback. We talk about constructive feedback for a reason. There are a lot of people that will just give feedback that just is completely useless, or worse, they won't give feedback at all. They'll give something much else that's like worse, like a toxic GitHub issue or something, and then you've all seen it, all seen what that can turn into. I'm sure none of you want to actually be on the receiving end. So sometimes users are wrong, or like just kind of bad, but when they're right, they're teaching you. The roles temporarily reverse, and you're learning from them because they know something you don't, even though you're the one who wrote the product, even though you're the one who wrote the docs. So this happens to me. I want to say, like, personally, this happens to me like multiple times a week when I'm working on Rustlings. I get people being like, oh, this doesn't make sense. And I'm like, oh yeah, it doesn't. How did I not see that? Happens constantly. And that's such a, I guess, humbling moment. But it's also, it kind of keeps you grounded in a way. It keeps you from writing stuff that's considered kind of too out there. And I think the more you do it, the more you have this experience, the better docs you end up writing. I really do. OK, let me have another sip of water. I'm just artificially lengthening my talk. I think we're behind time anyway, so if I finish earlier, it's actually good. Anyways, I want to leave you with a final quote from my boss, Ashley Williams, who also did the workshop with me yesterday. Sarah told me that I'll make Ashley mad if I call her my boss. So she said this at the end of the workshop, like completely offhanded, and I was like, this is genius. I need to put this in my talk. It's sort of what I've been talking about for the last 10 minutes, kind of distilled, and it is that advanced beginners are the best teachers because they still remember the pain of learning your thing. So I guess if you want a cool screenshot to upload to social media with like a big inspirational quote, this would be it. I'm going to take another sip of water and just leave it on here for like a second. Because that's the end of my talk. I don't have anything else. And so I'm just going to leave it like, woo-hoo.